This is another video, but this is a pro wrestling video because I watch pro wrestling as well. When I first started watching wrestling, I watched it later because most of my generation's millennials, we watched it during the Ruthless Aggression era, but I started watching wrestling in the quote unquote beginning of the quote unquote PG era, which in the video games they just call it the Universe era, but I digress. Like I remember for, I watched like Raws and SmackDown when like John Cena was like not in his prime, but he was Super Cena and Edge was like on SmackDown and like Big Show and Jericho were the Jericho Show and all that stuff and when I went on the comments, there was all these people saying this era sucks compared to the Attitude Era. It was amazing, and I kind of at first felt offended by that or didn't understand that. But as years went on, even like when I used to watch Good Mic Work, and I still do watch Good Mic Work, he even talked about this in like one of his podcasts. Earlier, I remember he said in his earlier years on YouTube, he used to like be more inflammatory. That was just his way of getting viewers. But he said like these guys, like they don't appreciate the product, and he said some profound thing. Even like in his John Cena video almost 2 years ago, he said that the people who had problems with that were all young. The Attitude Era's demographic was 18 to 34-year-olds, and most of them, I'm gonna be honest, were dudes. That was the demographic. Most of the demographic who watched that stuff were dudes. Even if you watch crowds back then, they're all like dude bros watching it. And I can understand the entertainment it must have gave because like you had WCW going against WWE, and like I remember even reading comments from that generation. They said even Mondays at schools, it would be like one side would be DX and the other side would be the NWO. It was probably a fun time, like the '80s, to be a professional wrestling fan. And just like even like Mike Work talks fondly about that era as well. He said like he would go to shows and he would like travel across the Carolinas and Virginia when I watched his videos to see shows. He said he got into car accidents with wrestlers. He met them at Waffle House and he's seen wrestlers maybe at places he stayed in. And it was just like that sounded amazing, and it just seemed like what people were saying was like everything was fresh. Austin was like this like redneck character who would stun Vince McMahon every week, knowing everything about Vince now. And probably he did the right thing. And you got The Rock, who I agree was like a pretty great talent, and he had great charisma. And it reminded me of like when I even watched Young Rock about the episode how he went from football to wrestling, and that like was a great thing for him. He was just amazing because I was like I said, I was born in '94, so I was like very young to experience that era. So I didn't watch wrestling, I didn't experience it. All I was doing when I was 5, I was watching Nickelodeon and Dexter's Lab, straight up. But I digress, I digress. But it's just like people were saying, oh, wrestling's not wrestling because it's kiddified and there's no blood or swearing or promiscuous women. And let's be honest, all this immature stuff. And I remember Mike Rook said, if you think wrestling has to be like that, you had an immature brain. And he was right about that. Most people were immature. Because I think some of those fans did not watch it for pure wrestling. I'm going to be honest. Some of those fans just watched it for garbage TV, let's be honest. And they're mostly dudes. But I digress, I digress. But I remember, like, ever since what the horrible thing that happened with Chris Benoit, WWE had to go in that direction. And for people Mike Work's age or people in their 40s or 50s, they understood, like, it's part of the business and that's not the problem. And I could say a lot of the problem with wrestling prior to, like, a few years back was lack of competition. It got stale. And let's be honest, Vince, because Vince was out of touch before they kicked him out. But since AEW came, you know, it made WWE better. And also, Triple H taking over worked for WWE. Because, like, even, like, watching Raw recently, like, The Rock was beating up Cody Rhodes and he was straight up bleeding on WWE television. You know, and there's a lot of great things that are happening in wrestling. And I think, and honestly, AEW was the good thing to happen for WWE. I think it forced both of them to compete. And AEW was not like TNA. AEW has money and has influence and stuff. And some people say it's an alternative, but no, I legit consider that straight up competition. Straight up. But it's like a lot of people have great memories of the Attitude Era. And I remember I made an analogy to one of my family members. It's like the Attitude Era is like Joe Montana and Steve Young's 49ers. it was a fun, exciting era, but you can't go back to that. You may be missing out what you have there. And people my age who bashed and hated Cena just appreciate him now. I appreciate him too now. And I never was a Cena hater. They said Cena had good, like they said Cena was great at what he did. He loved what he did and doesn't feel the same without him. And Cena has such positive messages like never give up, Cena never give up, rise above hate, attitude adjustment. Yeah, and those type of things. And now he's just beloved and people miss him. So yeah, that's my thoughts on the Attitude Era. It was a fun era, but people like also during that era also overlooked the '80s Hulkamania era, which in my opinion, helped wrestling got go mainstream and everything. So definitely, that's my two thoughts on this video.